What's going on, summoners? Welcome back to another Pro Guides video. I'm Kangas, and today I'm talking about 5 sleeper OP picks and builds that you should be abusing for some free LP. You already know the OP picks and builds since they're all over social media, even our own YouTube channel, but in this video, we're looking at some of the lesser known builds that you can take advantage of and that your opponents probably won't expect. Starting things off, we have Swain in the mid lane. We've already talked about how OP Swain is in both bot lane roles for months on end, but now it's time to shed some light on Swain as a solo carry. Swain top does well in some matchups, but definitely struggles in others. But in the mid lane, he is a pretty dominant powerhouse. He does so well as a mid laner because he can compete with and even beat down most of the lane bullies that are so prevalent in the current meta. Almost every one of the top champs in mid at the moment is a melee champion, and that means that you'll be able to land most, if not all, of your Q bolts when you trade with your opponent. Also, since they have to move into the minion wave to farm, you have an easier time landing your E. Even if your opponent just barely dodges the projectile itself, the E will pop on the wave and the explosion radius will usually catch them, giving you a chance to easily land a W and passive pull. Trades like this are super crucial to your success as Swain, since every time you land your W and passive, you'll stack up souls for more HP, enabling you to more easily fight without being blown up. Aside from his strong lane phase, he also has incredibly strong scaling, able to dish out massive AoE damage, on top of being a drain tank that can help serve as an extra frontliner as long as you have your ult up. Now let's get into the build. For items, you're going to start off with a Doran's Ring, and then build into Liandry's, Sorc Shoes, Zhonya's, and Demonic Embrace. If you're super confident that you won't get blown up, you can also grab Demonic Embrace before the Hourglass. After that, if you want maximum damage, you should build into a Void Staff and Rabadon's Death Cap, which we suggest, but you can also build some more utility or defensive-based items instead. Some items would be Rylai's for the slow, Morellonomicons for grievous wounds, Banshees for a bit more tankiness, or if you want to be super tanky, you can even go for a fully defensive item like Frozen Heart or Spear of Visage. For your runes, most of the time you'll be running Conqueror, Presence of Mind, Tenacity, Coup de Grace, Cheap Shot, and Ultimate Hunter, with the stat rune being double Adaptive Force and either Armor or Magic Resist. Conqueror gives you much better damage over the course of a team fight than other runes, but if you think you'll be slowed and or kited a lot in team fights, you can also run Phase Rush. Yes, you'll have the surprise advantage over your opponent because they probably won't know how to play against you, but you need to make sure that you actually know how to play these champs too, and we can't cover all the playstyles in one video. So if you want to try any of these out, you can also check out ProGuides.com and talk with one of our challenger coaches. They'll walk you through exactly what you're supposed to be doing in laning phase, throughout the mid game, and then scaling into the late game as well. We even got a discount going on if you use the code RANKUP2021 to get 20% off of a subscription, so check it out if you haven't already. So our next sleeper OP pick on patch 11.10, we got Ziggs and Xerath as bot lane carry combos. Most champs get their own slot on our sleeper lists unless we're talking about an entire class of champs. But in this case, both Xerath and Ziggs play in such a similar fashion that we're putting them together as a 2-in-1 special. Both of them have great poke and wave clear, allowing you to push in and whittle down standard marksmen in the role without ever having to directly fight your opponents in those 2v2 fights. This playstyle is super strong in solo queue because you don't really have to have coordination with your support to win the lane. You can just do your thing, freely farming the wave and winning trades all on your own. This is especially nice against kill lanes. As a normal AD carry, you'd have to walk up to the wave each time you want a last hit. This constantly gives your opponent windows to engage on you. But with these super long-range artillery mages, you can secure last hits from well outside of the danger zone. And once you have a few levels in your main abilities, and you pick up your Lost Chapter, you'll have the damage and mana sustain to quickly clear wave after wave, avoiding direct combat entirely with your opponents. Constantly shoving in waves also makes it really easy to play around both junglers. For your jungler, you'll always have prio in the lane, but when your jungler isn't around, you'll be able to quickly shove the waves and then back off to avoid dying to ganks. And once you reach level 9 and have your main spell maxed out, and you have some AP under your belt, your poke really starts to hurt, to the point that if you aren't ganked, you're constantly sending your opponents back to base. Just remember that you never want to get greedy for plates in these kinds of lanes. The one time you're exposed to being engaged on is when you walk up to auto the turret, or poke them under turret. Instead of attacking the turret, just continue to sling spells of the enemy AD carry as they try to farm. Once you force your opponents back, then you'll be able to take some plates. Ziggs is especially strong in this aspect. And outside of laning phase, you'll play these champions like any poke mage from mid lane. Use their high range to siege towers and poke enemies out around Dragon and Baron before a fight ever breaks out. Again, your high range gives you a sense of self-sufficiency. Since you don't need to be anywhere close to the enemies to actually deal damage, you won't have to pray for a competent team to constantly babysit you. Now for the builds, both champions can technically build almost exactly the same way, but we'll still talk about some variations for each one. Either way, you'll want to start off with the Thorns Ring and base as soon as you have Lost Chapter so that you can start bullying your lane. You'll build Chapter into Luden's Echo, even though some players do prefer Liandry's, but I strongly recommend Luden's in pretty much all situations. Even if the enemy comp has two really tanky frontliners, I'd almost always go Luden's just for the stronger lane phase and to have better poke on the enemy backline out of lane, since those are your primary targets anyway. Also, it just helps you shove faster. But regardless, after your mythic item of choice, you'll get Sorc Shoes, Horizon Focus, Rabadon's Death Cap, Void Staff, and Zhonya's Hourglass. As far as individual variations, if you're really planning to take towers as Ziggs, you could go for a Lich Bane over the Zhonya's or the Horizon Focus. Ziggs has his Satchel Charge for a bit of mobility and easy to land disengage, but since Xerath lacks that, you can actually consider a Banshees against certain threats. If you're super confident about not dying to any threats though, you can also pick up a Mejai's anytime after the Sorc Shoes on either champ and just cut the Zhonya's from the later part of the build. Now for runes, kinda like the items, the standard setup will be the same for both champions. You'll run Arcane Comet, Mana Flow Band, Transcendence, Gathering Storm, Presence of Mind so you don't go at bad times, and Coup de Grace. Your stat runes will be Ability Haste, Adaptive Force, and Armor. Moving on to the next pick, Gragas support isn't that popular, but it's also not unheard of. In fact, in some metas, it's actually been one of the best possible picks when paired with a super aggressive AD carry like Lucian. But for much of Season 11, it's been overshadowed by other, more OP CC-heavy champions in the role. But in the last few patches, almost all of them have taken nerfs that have brought them down a notch or two. So, as a result, Gragas has slowly and quietly rose back to being a strong pick. The thing that makes him so nice is that you can sort of use him like Maokai support to match your lane partner's strengths. When you're laning with an aggressive AD carry like Tristana or Samira, you can just force engages on the enemy bot lane. But when you're playing lane with a less mobile hyper carry like Jinx or Kog'Maw, you can instead use your E and ult to peel for them, allowing you to disengage and potentially turn the fight into kills for your carry. Now, Gragas always seems to be maxing something different every time he's in the meta, but this build is about building into Ability Haste fast and maxing your E. Whether you're playing him more aggressive or to protect your teammates, either way this gives you max disruption to enable your team. One more really nice thing about Gragas is that his ult is a super safe way to disengage bad fights without having to risk your own life. Most CC heavy tanky supports need to get pretty close to their opponents to land their biggest CC. But with Gragas, you can just chuck an ult from way downtown and it'll be enough to scatter the enemy team and stop a fight from going the wrong way. Another thing about his ult is that when you are actually committing to a fight, you don't always need to use it to knock the enemy carry into your team. Everyone wants to pull off that highlight reel combo, but a much easier and often more practical use is to put distance between the enemy backline and the rest of the team fight. If you knock the enemy carries away from the fight instead of into it, you give the rest of your team a few extra seconds to melt the enemy frontliners without the rest of their team doing anything to back them up. Kinda like a budget but very easy to land Poppy ult. Now for the build, for your items you'll start off with a Relic Shield and then rush Boots of Lucidity. After that, build into Locket of the Iron Solari, Zeke's Convergence, and Zhonya's Hourglass. You aren't building the Hourglass for the AP, by the way. You're more interested in the Ability Haste, and more importantly, the stasis that allows you to engage fights and then go golden to avoid being blown up once your Aftershock wears off. And you may be building tanky items, but Gragas isn't nearly as durable as most other tank supports naturally are. With that said though, your last item should be Vigilant Wardstone so you can maintain the ability to buy control wards for your team. For runes, you're going to run Aftershock, Font of Life, Bone Plating, and either Overgrowth or Unflinching, depending on whether you need the tenacity or not. Your second runes will be Biscuit Delivery and Cosmic Insight, with the stat runes being Ability Haste, Adaptive Force, and Armor. Now, Gragas' success as a pick, at least at the pro level, has largely been due to how well he synergizes in very specific duos. For example, the last time he was super meta, it was because he could be flexed to jungle to be paired with a Yasuo mid, or to support role to be paired with a Lucian AD carry, or even Yasuo AD carry. Both combos were considered pretty much unbeatable in straight up 2v2s, which is why his presence at the time was so high in pro games. And that brings us to today's question of the day. What's your favorite champ duo of all time? Whether it's a crazy 2v2 bot lane like the old school Leona Jarvan, a no-skill jungle duo like Pantheon Annie, or just a team fight pair like Camille and Galio, let me know your answers in the comments down below. Moving on to our next pick, we have Lissandra in the mid lane. While she's generally good just as an all-around pick, this is mostly focusing on how strong she is as a pick against assassins and melee mid laners, since those are the champs currently dominating the mid lane in this meta. We give an answer to these types of champions in most of our sleeper pick videos because we get it. We know how frustrating it is to deal with those lanes where a single mistake results in a solo death, and that death then results in the assassin snowballing their lead, killing you over and over and roaming to other lanes and then you getting flamed for it. And aside from Galio, most of the counters that we talk about to the assassins aren't necessarily traditional mid laners. We give ideas like Renekton and Wukong and Garen, and yes, while those picks do work extremely well and are pretty easy to use, you may not always want to play a melee bruiser mid lane. And I completely understand that, because I personally find mages way more fun to play, so that's why today we're talking about Lissandra. In a lot of ways, she feels like you're playing a control mage. She has strong wave clear, she's combo based, and when you're going on the offensive, she can burst down squishy targets from 100 to 0 in a fraction of a second. On top of that, she's not limited to just blowing up a single champ. With her passive, she can potentially do massive AoE damage in teamfights. But at the same time, she's not just some glass cannon damage dealer. With all of her CC, her E's super long distance blink range, and her ult's stasis, Lissandra is really hard to bring down for champs that rely on going all in with one big bursty combo. So this is bad news for pretty much any assassin. It is also an absolute pain for them to play against you in teamfights. Even if they try to ignore you and focus on your more vulnerable teammates, champions like Katarina, Fizz, and Zed may be able to easily outplay other mages' CC abilities, but with Lissandra, you can just point and click R to lock them in place before they can take anyone out. So don't always rush into a fight and ult yourself. Consider when you should use it to help burst down an otherwise slippery enemy instead. So now for her build, for items you're starting off with a Corrupting Potion, and if you go back early, feel free to buy an extra Doran's Ring just for more laning strength. After that, you'll start building towards Luden's Echo. Yes, Luden's, not Everfrost. This will be important. After that, you'll go Sorc Shoes, Horizon Focus, and Zhonya's. You can also buy the Zhonya's before Horizon Focus if you need it for a specific matchup or enemy composition. Then finish off your build with a Void Staff and Rabadons. For runes, you'll want to run Electrocute, Cheap Shot, Eyeball Collection, Ultimate Hunter, Transcendence, and Gathering Storm, with the stat runes being Ability Haste, Adaptive Force, and either Armor or Magic Resist. Some players do prefer the super safe Aftershock page, but I think that's kind of unnecessary. Your ult already gives you enough safety, and most players immediately ult after using W anyway, while Aftershock is still on them, meaning they're essentially just wasting the keystone in teamfights. Oh, and the reason you want to take Luden's Echo over the Everfrost is it's a little better for pushing the waves, and also just that burst damage is really nice, and you still have enough CC in your kit anyway, so you don't really need that extra layer. And our last sleeper pick for this patch is Taliyah Jungle. With the new jungle changes bringing back cash-up experience, turbo ganking, and constant skirmishing is a pretty OP strat. For that reason, picks like Elise and Shaco are completely dominating. But Taliyah is another pick that, despite being almost completely forgotten about, absolutely thrives when you can spend some more time ganking than AFK farming camps. While you do want to constantly gank, you don't want to do so mindlessly. Most of the other turbo gankers have very easy to execute ganks, while Taliyah needs to land W to get off her full combo. So with that in mind, you'll want to gank allies that already have CC in their kits so that they can set you up to land everything and burst down your targets. Taliyah also has pretty strong potential for dueling, but be careful with who you pick your fights with. Due to the relatively long delay between casting your W and it going off, any opponent with decent reflexes can flash over it and then get to you. So with that in mind, don't bother contesting champions like Lee Sin or Kha'Zix specifically, at least until you have some AP to kill them without even landing the W. Now, it is important to note that in teamfights, Taliyah can feel kind of awkward to play. Again, kind of like the laning phase, you need to play off your teammates. Don't just fish for random Ws on your own, because once you miss it, a lot of your burst potential is down. Wait for your teammates to lock someone down for you, and then try and hit your combo. Something to keep in mind is that Taliyah's E procs not just from the CC that you and your teammates put out, but even from the enemy's own jumps. For that reason, it can be a really useful zoning tool in fights against certain champs. While it may not have the ability to totally halt the jump and ground a dashing opponent like Poppy's W, the damage it does can be a huge punishment and even just kill up an enemy that disrespects the damage that you do. And lastly, one thing that sets Taliyah apart from the rest is ult usage. Many players just use the ultate to rotate to fights, but if you're having to do that, odds are you just need to work on your general awareness. With the movement speed from her passive, you should easily be able to get to the fights before they break out. That way, you'll have your ult to actually affect how things play out. While it may not do damage itself, being able to summon a massive wall of terrain can easily be enough to condemn flashless, immobile champions to their death when you use it to cut them off from the rest of their team. You can also use it to prevent the team from contesting your team when you're doing Dragon or Baron or pushing into their base. So now that you have a general idea of how to play the pick, here's our build. For your items, you'll start off with Hailblade, and then on an early recall, you'll pick up a Dark Seal when you can. Next up, start towards Sorc Shoes and Luden's Echo, and if you're snowballing really hard by the time you finish your Mythic, you can think about building into Mejai's. After that, go for Zhonya's, and then Rabadons and Void Staff. If you didn't get the Mejai's earlier, you can go for Horizon Focus, Morellonomicon, or Banshee's Veil. For runes, you'll run Dark Harvest, Cheap Shot, Eyeball Collection, Relentless Hunter, Nimbus Cloak, and Water Walking, with the stat runes being Double Adaptive Force and Armor. And that'll wrap things up for our sleeper builds that you've been missing out on for patch 11.10. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to sub so you never miss out on the meta guides and you're always in the loop of what the best picks are. Remember to let me know your favorite champion duo of all time in the comments down below. And last thing, don't forget to check out our Discord in the description box below to come join the Pro Guides community. That's it for today, so best of luck on the Rift, everybody. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.